You'll make more success and make the world a better place by being completely honest. Because if you're dealing with good people and you're treating them in a good way and presenting excellent opportunities or good opportunities, you will make good business. You have excellent candidates and excellent opportunities, you'll make excellent business. You have poor candidates and poor clients, and you're a poor consultant, you will make poor business.
Hello, welcome to the Life Changing Habits podcast. I'm your host, Jinsuke Ida. So this is the first episode that I'll be doing in English. So I have a special guest today. So I'll be interviewing a pioneer of the Japanese recruitment industry, Mr. Paul Adam Levine today. So Paul has been in Japan since 1985 and started his first entrepreneurial venture back in 1992 when he founded his first recruitment company, Access Technology Japan, which was the first ever IT-centric recruitment firm in Japan. He sold ITJ in 2007 on his 45th birthday and then retired for 3 years. He came out of retirement in 2010 when he established Pacific Associates Limited, which I was an employee of in 2011. And he also went on to establish the second ATJ, Accretive Talent for Japan, in 2012. And he has run both companies concurrently. He now runs ATJ as chairman and has been based in Bangkok since 2017. Paul has a bachelor's and MBA from San Diego State University and received executive education from Harvard from 2005 and 2007. He is also credited for establishing the first outbound call center to Japan, for which he was rewarded by the Japanese government. Finally, on a personal note, I consider Paul to be a great mentor of mine. And was the first person to give me a job when I was flunking out of college. And he has given me many, many life lessons throughout the years. I'm sure you'll find his thoughts on entrepreneurship, leadership, and recruitment to be interesting and insightful. If you do have any questions for Paul during the discussion, please leave comments in the comment section, and we will address any of the questions that you have if we have the time. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our guest today, Mr. Paul Levine. Hi, Paul. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. And it's an honor to be your first English interviewee.
It's an absolute pleasure. It looks like you've made yourself comfortable.
Indeed, yes. One of the benefits of working in Bangkok is it's a little bit more laid back than working in Minato-ku, for example.
I'd imagine. So I want to get right into it. So you established your first recruitment company in 1992. I was 1 year old back then. So I want to start out. My first question is, could you paint a picture of what the recruitment industry was like back when you first started?
Yes. Well, I began recruiting in the end of the 80s. There was an era before I had a typewriter and a phone book. And when you called people in those days, nobody knew what recruiting was. There was not a word. If you say today agent, people will know the katakana word agent from the ubiquitous advertising one might find in all the subway stations or in the trains and etc. In those days, nobody knew what it was. It required a paragraph to describe. And when I would call people, they would be mystified as to what I was calling them for. As a relic from the early labor laws, we as licensed recruiters can only charge the candidate at that time 1,400 yen as a registration fee, and we were considered to be working on behalf of the Ministry of Labor to find people jobs. This was the level of understanding of the people. I've never charged a candidate anything, and they even get free coffee for visiting. I gotta say, we serve good coffee in Bone, China. So come by for the coffee, if nothing else. So nobody knew what recruiting was. It was very much in its infancy. I think when in those days there were perhaps licensed recruiters, several hundred less than 1,000 certainly, and it was a very much growing number. Today there are tens of thousands of companies that have licensed. It's much harder to get then than now. And but having said that, it was more the same than different then and now. Japan was and remains uniquely a candidate-driven market in which getting people to go for jobs is much harder than finding a company willing to hire a qualified person. Those with experience in recruiting in most other countries where the trick is the guy who can get the client, which is to say the company willing to hire and presumably pay the recruiting fees, that's the driver of the industry. In Japan, it's all about the candidates. It used to be 100% about them. Now it's still candidate driven, but to a lesser extent.
So when you say a lesser extent, is it because kind of the stigmas around job change have been removed more so than before?
That is probably one of societal factors. It's my belief that society changes over decades, but stock price and business realities change with exchange rates and the new release of your Apple operating system. So the fact is that people have always been changing jobs in Japan, whereas the perception was that it's lifetime employment, but it's never actually been lifetime employment for most of the people. And even for those for whom it was, that was a relatively brief period in time. So that in practice and empirically stating, more candidates are willing to listen to what recruiting is because they better understand it. Yes, as you say, the let's say stigma of or any kind of negative impression of a person who changes jobs perhaps every 5 years or so is far less than it was. And as we know, Japanese people in general are very cautious, and they will not embark upon an important venture without understanding its implications and significance in its entirety. Hence, Japanese travel guides are twice as thick as in Japanese than English, and one page of kanji has about 1.4 times as much information as a page of English. Therefore, Japanese generally need about 3 times more information to proceed with confidence. And if they are not confident, they simply will not proceed on something as important as job change. So more awareness of what it is, its functionality, social norms change. And as a result, in the old days, getting almost any person you could find with some reasonable skills could be successfully recruited and get a job for them now. And all companies were hiring. In the beginning, it was the end of the bubble era. Anyone could get a job. And it was the end of the bubble era, and it was barren. Much like today, the market moves up and down, but that's another point. So it's more the same than different. It's not a matter of yes or no. I would say in those days it was 100% candidate driven. Now it's perhaps 65-70% candidate driven, which means the clients are more discriminating, and there are more recruiting agencies now than ever. In those days, there were very few, and what few existed were often fairly primitive, unrefined, and of modest scale. Now there are very large organizations in great number, and the companies that I've had the pleasure of forming and managing are what's called a boutique, smaller size shops, anywhere from beginning up to perhaps 100 people. The typical size of a recruiting company in Japan is, I think, on average, statistically, less than 2 people. There's a few big ones, and you have a normal distribution curve. Few companies have more than 5 employees, nor do they last 5 years. But that's another point. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very much so. I'm curious about the point you mentioned. They're more similar than they're different. But in what ways are they similar, and in what ways have things changed aside from the technological factors? Like obviously the internet is a lot more of a thing these days, obviously. But in what ways are they similar, and what ways are they different?
The similarity comes from what I was answering in perhaps too much detail, that it's still basically and fundamentally a candidate-driven market. That is to say, more companies want to hire than there are people who want the jobs. In that regard, it's more similar than different. And how it's different is, back in the day, getting the names of any person to call was very difficult. There was no internet. Lists of names were called phone books. And just getting anyone to speak to was quite an accomplishment. So there was an art, a black science, or what one might call it, of name collecting, how to accumulate names. In those days, there was no direct methodology, and to my chagrin, but in the interest of being completely forthright, most companies would call up pretending to be looking for Mr. Smith, who we met at the golf course. What was his name again? I think he was in sales. Yoshihito? No. Yoshimata? No. And name collecting, intimidating office ladies, pretending you're from headquarters, etc. And this is the dark side or the underbelly of recruitment. In fact, the first time I knew what recruitment was, I went for a job interview in, I think, the company that received the very first recruiting license in Japan, run by a very colorful person. And I was told that the job was to call up, pretend to be somebody else and collect names. And the typical person working there was ex-karate teachers and various assemblage of people you might find in a Star Wars bar. I found this to be rather shocking, in as much as in 30 years of recruiting, more, I don't believe I've ever needed to actually tell out-and-out fabrication to anyone. I take it as a moral hazard, and it's just wrong, and it's not necessary if one knows what they're doing, which many sadly did not at that time, and certainly do not today. So name collecting went from almost a past to forgotten area of the business, because information is more or less data ubiquity. And the advent of LinkedIn and other social media tools has fundamentally transformed the market from one of being access to a treasure trove of names to being one of the quality of the message that one might deliver. Let me just say, as is my wont, before the Industrial Revolution, people would accumulate gunpowder and cannons over perhaps a decade and prepare for a campaign. Once the ammo was gone, you were done and you'd go home. With the American Civil War, the advent of bringing ammunition in unlimited quantity by train to the front lines changed warfare in the same way that now having names alone will not, the size of your database alone will not give you a strong competitive advantage. It gives you some advantage. In the old days, it was more like Napoleon hoarding his gunpowder before marching onto a campaign. Now it's more like you order it from Amazon. So in that regard, it's quite different.
So you mentioned data ubiquity. So there's definitely more of a kind of an even playing field, I guess, in terms of access to information as a recruiter. But obviously, that's not the only thing that set recruitment companies or recruiters apart. As you see it, what are the things that companies do well given that they have the same, more or less the same level of access to data information?
As in so many businesses, ultimately this is a professional service business, or perhaps intermediation, the recruitment businesses. And I would say it's the quality of the people in the team and how it's organized in the teamwork. And I would say, furthermore, this originally stems from the headwaters, which is the fundamental purpose of the company as defined by the owners of the company. Some companies are, the very large ones are now publicly held corporations, and their interest is in shareholder value. And this resonates throughout the entire organizations. Others are run by amateurs who thought that getting 50% commission was only half as good as getting 100% commission. So I'll make my own company, and I shall take whatever assets I could take from my old company, leave with whatever I can do, and strike out as a independent, hopeful, wannabe startup. And then the purpose of the company is survival and perhaps enriching the person who thus started the recruiting company. The owner is thus an amateur who probably has a baby at home and a mortgage someplace out in Chiba, and they will try and enrich themselves as much as possible. So you have a company that is, let's say, underfunded and mainly focused on making money for the owner. There's I would think as many types of companies as there are owners. And this drives the quality of the teamwork in the organization. So I would say, in short, the difference is the quality of the people, the purpose of the company, the philosophy, and how it's all organized. Once again, going back to the story of, military thing, Genghis Khan, how he took over. If you have 5 individual arrows, easy to break, but if they're unified, they are unbreakable. If you have a 100-person organization with no teamwork, you have 100 one-man teams. Or you could have another organization and it's suitably organized and managed such that true teamwork can be obtained and maintained. And this is mutually enriching to the parties involved. And as a result, what you have is a 10-man team. So it's the quality of the leadership and people in the company. I would say none of the organizations I've ever had, this is now my 3rd recruiting company, and not counting their various subsidiaries, having employed perhaps 1,000 people over the years. Well, I can say we've never had any kind of competitive advantage in terms of technology or proprietary licenses or things that might drive what could be called barriers to entry or something like this. We have no monopolistic power of any kind. It's all about the quality of the team and the leadership and the people. If you take people and treat them well, you will get good service. How can a company be a good place to work with if it is not a good place to work for? So I would say the quality of the leadership, the timber of the organization, this makes the difference. And if you have bombarded by emails and phone calls by ill-trained people, you might have an organization that's under a great deal of pressure from its owners to just make activity for the benefit of the people in the company without regards to the effect that has on the candidates, that is to say the people that they're speaking to. In microeconomic terminology, the time and the value of information that a candidate, which is a person looking for a job, renders forward is an externality to the organization. So in other words, you only care about yourself, and whether or not you have a positive or negative impact on the people that you encounter is irrelevant. Such organizations are many. The companies I'm involved with we treasure the candidates because it is a candidate-driven market. And it just seems beyond that ethically incumbent upon an organization to try and have a positive effect on society. Perhaps this has prevented myself and the people who've worked for me from making as much as they could in one sense, but on the other hand, I'm still paying the bills after 31 years. Never missed a payday.
Right. So you mentioned, so it sounds very much so like it sounds from the top, and things like having 1,000 one-man teams definitely resonates. And I've seen people working in those kind of environments, especially at some other companies that other recruiters that I've networked with and things like this. What are some things that, for instance, like you did, or some other leaders that you've seen do well to get recruiters to work together? Because very much so, if you kind of leave them to their own, it's very much so kind of a individual. How can I say it?
Law of the jungle.
Law of the jungle, sure.
In order to have teamwork, not only in a recruiting company, but I think generally in society as a whole, there needs to be rules in place such that people feel secure in doing transactions with others. If you felt everyone might take advantage of you, like in the jungle days, then it's very difficult to have large-scale commerce and complex organization and collaboration among people who are not perhaps blood relatives. It's a sad part of human nature, but I think it's there. We are tribalistic in principle, and perhaps even from some deep biological reason, right? It's all down to reproduction. Biology is nothing happens without it having a reproductive consequence. So people stick together. Okay, what does that mean in practice? Creating a team a situation in which the strong do not prey upon the weak. The company is well organized. There are rules, procedures for how things are done, how credit is allocated, and people feel secure in that, such that they can share their information, and with trust comes the fundamental ingredient of teamwork. If there's not trust among people, teamwork is not very possible, I would say. And as a result, I try to, and the people I've seen who are successful, engender organizations that are well organized and where people do not feel they are dealt with by capricious management, favoritism, nor politics, and they are, let's say, secured by, as citizens walking down the street, you feel protected by rules of law. Similarly, in a company, if you feel protected by the organization and the management of the organization, then people feel confident in collaborating. And to the extent you have collaboration, you go from a bazaar in a street bazaar in perhaps Uzbekistan to a highly organized society where people are able to collaborate effectively. For example, I've always said we want to be Isetan, one of my favorite stores. They're good at making large-sized clothes. So if you want to be Isetan and not a bazaar in the Middle East, I would say you need to have trust, so that the people, that the candidates and clients you're dealing with feel they're working in a unified organization as opposed to a one-man shop under the control of the bazaar, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. I mean, I think one of the things that the way I see it, once everyone when you start at the bottom, everyone's kind of a recruiter. People move up the ranks, but they're still kind of a individual contributor. Once someone's elevated into a leadership position or management position, I think sort of the temptation to kind of capitalize on your position is very, very strong, let's say, because kind of the individual gains that you can, the financial gains that you can get from exercising power is so tempting. What are some things that you've seen in effective leaders that don't go for kind of the quick win and can effectively create an organization like an Isetan, like you described? What are some?
Yes, well, we can start with the Magna Carta, whereby the monarch of the British Isles, or whatever you might call it at that time, was no longer absolute. There was a rule of law established, or more of a rule of law, perhaps. So those organizations which are based on principles of, to the extent possible, fairness, transparency, and stability, allow for more collaboration. Thus, people put up skyscrapers and not stone castles, if you will. So if you look at anywhere, it's natural for those who have some kind of leverage to try and use that for their own gain. You can see this anywhere in the world today, in almost any society, in almost any industry. There are lobbyists trying to get protective, beneficial regulations to give themselves some kind of monopolistic advantage. Despots, people putting their children, nepotism. We can see these all around us today. And do they not give us a feeling of how unfair, or this isn't cricket, or this is not how things might otherwise be, which would be more encouraging? Similarly, at the micron level, a tiny company like the ones I've had the privilege of working in and managing are based on the principle of let's not have that. The baser instinct is to try and use one's control to get more for themselves, right? The king has 1,000 wives in biblical times, God help him. And the pauper maybe has none because he can't afford to have one. So the powerful will just take her away. Let's not be that way. Let's not be primitive. Let's collaborate and have prosperity. A company can be a platform for prosperity rather than a pit of despair. To be a little bit poetic. And so I've tried to manage the company that way because I once was that poor guy who was taken advantage of. And nothing drives away good people faster than feeling they've been treated unfairly. Fairness and an opportunity to grow, I think, are the minimum requirements for maintaining people for the long period of time. If people don't feel they're growing, they'll move on. If you have quality people. If you don't have quality people, you can't give quality service. So you need to keep people for the long term, in which case one must provide a situation which is worthy of good people staying for a long time. If that makes sense. So my philosophy and approach has always been everyone needs to drink from the well. Everyone wants a taste of cream. And if the company tries to suck up all the profit and wring the last yen of profit out of every transaction within the company, they will be left with 100% of very little. I think the more you give away, the more you get back. And for me, it works.
Can a bad company or leadership turn a good person bad?
Oh God, yes. When I first started a company, like almost anyone who becomes president of a company or carries the title of president, they become quite impressed with themselves and are sure that when they get up from the bath, that the water that remains is Hennessy XO. And it's natural that newly minted presidents become often petty tyrants or some sort of a caricature of the organization that they came from, becoming more of what they hated in their old company than it was themselves. It takes a certain amount of time to learn to be a good leader or a president of a company in particular, believe it or not, there's a learning curve even in running a professional service organization. And being a real president or leader does not come from the business card or the fact that you have a company with 2 million yen capital and you're now a properly registered juridical person in Japan, and thus you are now shacho or president. In fact, it's more than that, and it takes time. And I would say in the beginning, I probably was a bit of a beast and have mellowed over time, as I'm now 58. And at that time, I was 30 years old when I started my first company. You can imagine that the interceding years have let me understand that, in fact, my bathwater is waste, not Hennessy XO. But as a warning to all of you who might be watching this, thinking of being a president or starting your own company, you owe it to the people around you and to yourself to look in the mirror and say, you're still that same dude who you were a month ago before you had that new upgraded title. Leave the egotism at the door.
What was your experience, or what were you like as a president at the start? And was there any particular moment where you kind of had, you can call it enlightenment or anything? Was there a point where you suddenly changed, or was it a gradual thing?
The ability to see oneself as others might see them is not as strongly imbued on all people. We can say what they call the distant mirror, in which you can see yourself as others might see you, is rare. Some people choose not to look at it. I've always kept this in mind and have tried to become a better person, become the person that I wanted to be. And I'm still a work in progress. Self-knowledge is the greatest knowledge, right? I think Confucius said a person who truly knows himself is achieved a greater feat than to defeat 1 million people in combat or something like that. So still trying and learning. I would say for me, as an interesting anecdote, our first company trip to Hawaii, which means we're starting to make a little bit of money. It took everybody to Maui, as I had promised to do that in a slightly drunken state. And I always keep my word, given drunken or otherwise. And we went there, and we were going to have ocean view rooms. Well, I didn't realize that ocean view in Hawaii is like olive size in California. They range from tiny to jumbo to super jumbo, and I thought I was picturing a full-on something out of a big view, panoramic view of the ocean. No, the fact that you could see the ocean made it an ocean view room, not the fact that you have to stand on a soapbox in order to see it. And I went to the front desk and complained, and they said, this is how it is. And for about 45 minutes, I harangued them and negotiated and bullied them into agreeing to move everyone to new rooms. And then I was quite worked up into a heat of lather because I was more forceful in my presentation in those days. And then I looked at a mirror. I think the hotel's name was written on a mirror, and I looked in the mirror and I looked at myself, and I saw in the eyes of those two clerks in Hawaii that I was an asshole. Or they thought so. And then I realized, yes, I probably am I'm here on holiday, who cares? So the fact that I was right and could make my situation as I wanted it to be, perhaps did not make it the right thing to do. The difference between power and wisdom takes time to settle in. And I said, you know what? They were making the new keys, and I looked at them. I said, you know what? Forget it. I went to the bar and I drank vodka and soda with green olives, of which I was very fond at the time, low carb. And that was it. And I realized, yes, now I have the ability to make money and manage people to make money. But that doesn't mean because you have the power to do something does not mean it is necessarily wise to do so. Sometimes doing less is doing more, especially when it involves intimidating other people because you can.
Fascinating.
Yes. still trying to learn this lesson.
Mm.
And you can still see it today. People who are impressed with themselves and perhaps overly negotiate something that is not, as they say, worth the candle to keep playing the game. But they'll negotiate because it's a matter of pride. And is pride often not the downfall of many great men? I would say if you look at history, without pride, we are little. Too much will kill you or lead to your downfall. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm curious about your views on what makes a good recruiter. So, however you want to define it, could you kind of paint a picture of your ideal recruiter?
Ideal recruiter would be somebody who makes money in an honorable way, such that their work makes it easier for the people around them to be more successful as well. Perhaps that's a bit abstract. I would rather have a person who does their job honorably in such a way as to enhance the ability of the people around them to be successful over a prima donna, a difficult prima donna superstar, right? Great teams are made of great, good, solid individuals doing their best rather than a few superstars. I think in sports teams, you can see this, and in life often as well, right? David and Goliath. Goliath was a really big, strong man, but he didn't win the battle of the day, and the champions didn't either. It was the Roman legionnaires, jumping forward a few millennia. The Roman legionnaires were not the greatest fighters individually, but together and on a good day, they were unstoppable back in their day. So I would say good team players who work hard and do their best and have it in their mind to add value to others and diligently make revenue, make deals, which means helping good people. Most of the Japanese people we dealt with are honorable people, to be sure, from whom I've learned so much and owe so much. You're dealing with the lives of people for whom their career matters a great deal. So people who understand the gravitas of what we're doing. It might be said that a career to an average person in Tokyo is perhaps half the weighted value average of their marriage to them. They're very serious, and it affects their marriage. If we can help a person get a job where they can take more pride in themselves, be more successful, and make more money, that makes that person probably a better, more happy person, a happier person to be with. And if we help 200 people change the jobs in a year and get them an on average 10% a year increase, we're creating 20 new salary men that never have to be educated, fed, take up space on trains, et cetera, et cetera. So we're helping society by helping people one at a time. So people who can think of it that way. You need a certain hunger. We hunt. People do not come to us. We have to approach people who do not know us and deliver our message that we have opportunities that can enrich their life, but will require them sharing confidential information about themselves and maybe for the first time realizing they're not happy themselves, right? The people we're talking to are maybe not entirely satisfied, but don't want to face the reality that they're not. When we present them an opportunity, it forces them to reflect a bit. So we're helping people reflect on their lives. We're helping people improve their lives. So we need people who have a certain amount of leadership to drive that, some charisma, hunger, because it's not easy. It's not an easy job to do. We have unlimited responsibility to our candidates and clients and absolutely no leverage. We do not own or control either. And yet we're completely held responsible for the outcome of the interview process, over which we have no direct control. We can only try and influence. For example, the game, what is that called? Where they throw those big pucks down the middle of the ice there. What's that called? Curling. In the Olympics, which is a game most people only see on the Olympics. And somebody throws the big stone down the ice, and the guys with the little brushes up there trying to influence the track of that whatever they're throwing down there. That's us. We're the little guys with the brushes. We don't throw it. We can't control it, but we can just try and influence the direction a bit. And the more that puck would follow our instructions, since we do this all day, every day, probably the better the outcome they might have. That's perhaps about self-aggrandizing, but the point is, we need people who are helpers, who want to help, and are driven to success and driven to help other people achieve success. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
My basic algorithm is as follows. The revenue a person brings in minus their cost plus or minus their effect on the people around them is the value of an employee. We want people who are, even if they're not doing deals, they're making the others around them more capable of doing deals by being encouraging and positive and helping. This again, as compared to the narcissistic prima donna, who tend to be unstable and not last long in any event. Especially in an environment like the companies I run, where we have rules to prevent prima donnas from preying upon the young and the weak, who are diligently doing their job, but they don't even know if they're being taken advantage of. So we want people who want to be part of a team and want to help people grow, and who are hungry and have a good reason. Nothing is a better reason than somebody who just got married, or they're watching their wife develop, preparing to give birth, and their wife gets bigger day by day. And I've seen many a young man who is not so motivated, become the hardest working person you ever met in your life upon having a child. I was such a person myself. Walking with a slight fever up the hill, approaching Shinjuku Station and watching a million heads bobbing, and having 2 small children and a very weak company at home, and thinking to myself, if I don't succeed, who picks me up? And I saw rising above this massive bobbing heads on its way to Shinjuku Station, the west exit, these poor children in Africa who have bellies bloated by hunger. And I thought, why will that not be my children? Do I have some birthright? No. Go live on mom's sofa? Not an attractive option. And I put me on a 15-year working spree that propelled me from being a C-grade recruiter to having a company with more than 100 people. So strong motivation, like having a family.
Right. When you hire people, do you look for those kind of because what you described isn't necessarily a character trait, or it's more of a reason to work. Do you look for those kind of things as well when you're screening for a new employee?
Yes. Well, if we're talking about hiring a brand new person for the recruiting industry, and I've probably done as much of that as most anyone you're likely to talk to, there are certain factors, and I would say an intrinsic hunger and quality, a desire to improve themselves, and examples of having been successful at something and stuck it through. What do you call it? Mika Boza, somebody who starts something and finishes it and moves on to the next, because what they're looking for in life. They don't know what they're looking for. They're looking for that job that is trying to discover themselves. No, we want people who are looking for an honorable job, which will take them to where they want to be, and are willing to modify themselves to match the job. How many shoes you ever put on that fit perfect? No, you buy a decent pair of shoes and you break them in, right? Because that's how it used to be. So we're looking for the right kind of person. What kind of person would that be? Driven to success by some intrinsic force. Then you take the external force of that person who has intrinsic pressure to drive themselves to success, and then you put the extrinsic pressure on them of the need to feed a family, and now you've got a superstar in the making, if they're properly guided and trained. And guiding and training is something we spend a great deal of time on, because we want to have employees that stay with us for 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm happy to say that the current representative director of the president of the Japan branch of our company, is joined with no experience. He was a little bit rough around the edges, God bless him, and now he's a superstar of diligence and very much a completely trustworthy person of poise. I saw in him that hunger and ability. That was 20 years ago. A number of people that I work with, I've been working with on and off for more than 20 years. So I guess pick them out right. They have to be socially awkward people. Introverts tend to not make it. Those who have the ability to persuade others to let them get it from life what it is that they're looking for. I don't mean it in a manipulative way, but some people just can't get motivate others to do anything. Some don't like to try. You have to have a certain hunger. You have to be part psychologist, part salesman, and very motivated to keep it driving forward, because leadership, it's easier for almost anyone to stay in the job they have now than to take a chance and move on. Yes. The angle of repose. A rock falling downhill will stop when it reaches that angle of repose. We have to sort of motivate them to be more. And sometimes that takes leadership and persuasion. Who doesn't want a better job? Who wants to actually undergo the risk to have that better job? Right? Men are often driven to do only what they must do, not what is actually. Very few are so completely logical as to think, gee, I need to proceed forward and actually have a logical plan. I don't think most men are that way. And women probably have similar issues, although I've never been a woman. Have those issues and even more, the pressures of family and all this as well. Their situation is further complicated. God bless the women who make the world what it is today. So the answer is looking for that right kind of person. And the answer is you'll know it when you see it. As the great Supreme Court Justice once said, the difference between art and pornography, you'll know it when you see it. You can just tell. Some people have it and some don't.
So you've obviously met with many candidates and consulted people who have been on the edge of making decisions. And Japanese people tend to, you described in part kind of the struggle of kind of Japanese people with the culture, and that they need more information than people from other cultures. What are some common, I guess, things that hold people back, whether it be psychological or societal, things that people tend to have, at least in Japan, that you've seen?
Well, lack of confidence in oneself is a curse.
Yeah.
But it is a curse that is visited upon almost everyone, I would say, to a certain extent. I don't mean bravado, I mean true self-confidence. So the ability to say, I'm capable of doing more and I'm going to try and take some risk. Most folks, especially as they get older, become more risk averse. Rather than seeking benefit, they seek not to lose what they have. Often, for various societal reasons, the wives of the people we're speaking to are against the job change, because perhaps the person's in his first job, he's working for a company that's listed on the first stock exchange of Tokyo, a big name, and they're going to move to a smaller company with less prestige, but maybe offers 40% more pay and much more opportunity for that person to be happy and grow and express themselves. And often the wives don't understand this, and they're simply concerned with the brand name of their husband and how this affects their children getting into the very best private schools. And they're filled with fear because recruiting is still not understood. We are all ultimately a product that brands ourselves. Whereas this sort of highly internal locus of control, thinking that I am a person that I need to market and brand and develop. Often people are passive, waiting for someone to lead them to where they need to be. And as the idea of mid-career change and building one's own career is relatively new to Japan, as I said, when I first began, nobody knew what recruiting was. Very few people had the awareness that they are a unique brand, so to speak, that needs to be gardened or curated or developed in a proactive, thoughtful way. Most folks just don't have this. And then the people around them, family matters so much. And the family certainly doesn't understand, because let's say the common sense of building a career and always have your resume in your briefcase. I heard people say when I was a child, not that I knew what a resume was, but you should always have that and be prepared and open for opportunities. Whereas in Japan, it is less so. They do not understand. They are responsible for their own development. They're waiting for somebody to take care of them. If that makes sense. So there's deep-rooted societal aspects. They don't understand how the career development thing works. And without sufficient information, who would make an important decision? Yes? And therefore, the recruiter can serve as an invaluable advisor if the person they're talking to is willing to listen to advice, and if the consultant himself is able to present himself and his knowledge and leverage the resources in this company to help impress upon the people they're meeting that they have a collective value to be added to the process, such that they can be more confident in moving forward. Hence, strong, pushy salesman-like tactics are doomed to failure, because nobody wants to be sold or pushed into something. They want to be given information and let them make a decision. This is a delicate balance between leadership. What's the difference between leadership and management? Ancient question. What's the difference between helping drive a process and being overly pushy? I would say different societal norms dictate different levels of pressure in individuals, and the sophistication of the person you're dealing with, and a great many factors. But anyway, it's a very delicate balance, and it is almost as much art as it is technique. And some people are good with people, and some people just give the impression of being trustworthy, whereas others seem, if they lack confidence themselves, just sounds like empty sales words. And ironically, the closer a candidate grows to making that important decision, the more they recognize the agent, recruiters, as having a vested interest in just getting them to sign. And thus you have, as you get closer to a time where you need the most credibility, you're also moving to a critical juncture where you have the highest risk of being perceived as having a conflict of interest, where the agent just wants to do a deal and the candidate wants to further his interest. So those people who do not spend a lot of time building trust at the beginning will have a hard time being effective in helping people make good decisions at the end. And if I might add, parenthetically, what is a good decision? A well-informed, logical, good yes or a good no. They have all the facts, and they've made a decision, yes or no. These are either a good yes or a good no is acceptable. A bad yes is an uninformed yes, and a bad no is probably a waste, motai nai. This could have been a great opportunity, but because the agent did not provide enough necessary information to the candidate does not feel prepared to make a move because they did not have enough information. So avoiding a bad yes and a bad no is sort of what we're all about. A good yes or a good no is equally valuable, because if you have good people, good candidates, good clients, you can make good business that helps people. So a good yes or good no is equally welcome, although we hope there's enough good yeses to keep the lights on.
You touched upon a point that's so it's something you have to kind of experience until you kind of understand it. Is the point where the closer you get to closing the deal, the more of a conflict of interest you have with the candidate. I think a common mistake that beginners make is become kind of more salesy and try and be a little bit more assertive towards the end of the deal to try and kind of pressure a candidate into making the jump. But without realizing the fact that the more, the closer it becomes to the actual decision, the more the candidate is on edge and they can start to feel the conflict of interest. So I've been in a position to do this, and you were kind of in that position back at my previous company. But sort of being senior recruiters tend to come in at the end, towards the end of the deal, to try and talk candidates through their decision-making process. But obviously, that person hasn't been involved in the process and hasn't been building trust with the candidate from the start. But why is it that a seasoned recruiter would come in at that point, and how is it that that person can sort of create a bond without the prior buildup? What are the ways that a seasoned recruiter would do that? I kind of have my own philosophy, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts of how a seasoned recruiter can kind of immediately establish trust with a candidate.
That is a fascinating question.
Mm.
Why would they come in halfway through the process? Because they're probably trying to leverage a lot of young guys to get a lot of deals halfway cooked. And like the guy who chops up potatoes in the kitchen and puts together the basic food, and then the chef with the big hat and the big gold medal comes out and applies a special sauce, lights it on fire to delight.
Sure. Let's say that that recruiter doesn't have any vested interests aside from they're trying to help, for the sake of argument.
Well, it's hard to imagine a person being in any situation where they don't perceive some element of self-interest, but more or less, it's how you strike the candidate. I think that whereas for the most part, Japanese people, if I can say, are not the most verbally articulate, and especially when speaking to foreign people or even among themselves, verbal skills are not the most important way of communication, or the only way of communication, whereas they would be in perhaps America. I'm from Chicago, so the verbal word is very, very important. The person, however, Japanese have the ability, some kind of ability to determine, I think, an excellent filter of what is the true intention of the person they're talking with. What would you call this? Harage, inshin, denshin?
Ishin denshin?
I'm probably, I never learned to speak Japanese. I learned over the years. I never went to school. So I might be mispronouncing these things. But the inshin, denshin, harage, they can tell when they're being manipulated and perhaps not being dealt with in the most forthright sort of way. If they're dealing with somebody and they can see in his eyes and how he smells and feels and twitches and all these millions of signals that our brains can barely perceive, but if they can tell if this person is both experienced, knows what he's talking about, is delivering a truthful, useful message in such a way that the person receiving the message feels they're being dealt with in a forthright, honest way, they can just tell. You know when you're being conned, if I dare say, when you're being bullshitted, you know it. Furthermore, it takes months for a recruiting process, typically from beginning to end, no less than 2 months. Normally, occasionally they go fast, but especially with people who are new to it, it takes 2-3 months. The half-life of a lie is half as long as the deal takes. So if the candidate feels that there's anything at all that was not exactly consistent with what they were told, they will detect it by the end of the process, and thus trying to manipulate, lie to, or in some way prevaricate or some kind of mendacity or something that just doesn't ring true, they'll smell it and they'll tell. People know. Just as Japanese are often not the best at verbal communication, that same power is in reading people's true intentions. So if you have a true heart and good intentions and you're trying to deliver the message and information such as to help a person make a good yes or a good no, the candidate will feel and sense that. And if you do not have a good heart and you are not trying to do that and you are simply trying to make a deal for your own benefit, the candidate will often feel that. And if you can, these simple, cheap, sleight of hand magician type tricks are enough, or what one is relying on to be successful as a recruiter, then you are probably dealing with relatively unsophisticated or not very intelligent people. You are what you eat, as they say. If you are dealing with the dopey or not so mentally sharp people, and that's the level of person you can present to a client, you will be perceived as a dopey recruiter. If you are an excellent recruiter and you are thus able to work with excellent people, and you are now presenting excellent people to excellent companies, then in time you will be an excellent recruiter. So the point is, lies are a empty promise and wrong and bad, and you muddy the water for everyone else. So if you're doing that now, please stop. It just makes it harder for everyone else. And if you're not, don't be afraid to tell the truth, because if you're dealing with good people and good companies, you will make deals. There's no need for it. It's counterproductive, and it's just morally wrong. You'll make more success and make the world a better place by being completely honest. Because if you're dealing with good people and you're treating them in a good way and presenting excellent opportunities or good opportunities, you will make good business. You have excellent candidates and excellent opportunities, you will make excellent business. You have poor candidates and poor clients, and you're a poor consultant, you will make poor business. I think it just kind of goes that way. If I can refer to the great philosopher, the character called Rocky from the Rocky movies, talking to his little neighbor girl. You hang out with chump people. You have chump friends. You're a chump, right? Don't smoke cigarettes. It makes your teeth brown. I myself am very much strongly anti-tobacco, as you can see. And by the way, this is a Monte Cristo #2. I've only one left. They're hard to get in Thailand. I'll miss it when it's gone.
I'm interested to kind of shift to the perspective of a candidate, because I think it's certainly possible that some people that are listening could be candidates interested to hear a recruiter's perspective. I think one of the most, as I imagine, is one of the most difficult things to do as a candidate looking to change jobs is to kind of parse through all the different profiles and characters that reach out to you, especially if you have a LinkedIn profile. I think the amount of messages that you would receive from a recruiter on a daily basis is pretty crazy these days. So what, in your mind, I've asked other recruiters this as well, what are some ways that candidates can be better at selecting quality recruiters?
Well, in the fairy tales, you have to kiss a lot of princes. You have to kiss a lot of frogs to make a prince. I've never kissed a prince or a princess either, right? There's a few queens I've seen, but never kissed one, as far as I know. The point is, listen to what they have to say. However, try to deal with people that you have as a candidate, rather than being annoyed that they're being continually pestered. Keep an open mind. Listen to what they have to say. Now, you said recruiters are contacting them, and I would say that for the most part, often recruiters are not contacting them. They have outsourced contact centers, which will relentlessly just pound profiles on LinkedIn. So they're not actually being approached by a proper recruiter. They're being approached by a junior person
Right.
who perhaps has very little to offer. However, behind that person, if you might just fail to say no and actually listen, instead of just a no, I'm annoyed, to a maybe, then an opportunity might present itself, which could be thought-provoking. And even if it's only thought-provoking and helps you reflect, you as a candidate, reflect more on your own situation, this is itself a value. Again, perhaps this conversation can help lead one to a better understanding of their own self and their own situation, right? Self-knowledge being the most precious. And I think psychologists often say that it takes a great deal of effort to truly understand one's own situation. So if you're not prepared to listen, why are you not prepared to listen? Perhaps you're afraid to find out that you're actually that little voice in your head when you're on the Chuo line on your way to work for an hour and a half in the morning. You're not in the situation you want to be. So one might ask, why are you resisting to listen? Perhaps it's because you don't want to find out you're actually not happy where you're at. And you're not brave enough or have enough confidence in yourself to do something, to give yourself the life that you probably could have or deserve. So how to screen them out? If it looks like junk mail, ignore it. If it looks like a well-crafted message in a thoughtful way, why not listen? However, well, it's not easy. First of all, one must understand, are they really happy? How many times have I talked to people that say, I have no interest in leaving, I'm very happy with my job, only to find that their company was just bought by the company they quit 3 years ago. And they're back to where they're heading back to where they came from. The situations are fluid. As product life cycles shorten, the length of tenure in one company is also being shortened, right? So perhaps, annoying as they might be, take a moment to listen. One never knows.
I think people who effectively form partnerships with recruiters do so over the long run. But what are some characteristics of a candidate who builds a strong relationship with a recruiter? Because I think it goes both ways. There's things that recruiters can do well, and there are also characteristics that, or not characteristics, but things that candidates can do on their side to have recruiters help them the best they can. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm living now in Thailand, which is a fascinating country. And Thailand and Japan share a couple similarities, one of which being neither country was ever actually colonized and homogenized. So they have their own unique Asian culture based on Buddhist beliefs, perhaps. So Japanese and Thais are similar in their deep OS, but perhaps completely opposite in their modality of how they conduct their lives. So in Thailand, people will never say no. They won't do yes. Japanese tend not to say yes, but they won't do no. This makes sense. Did I say that right? Yes. Thais will never say no, but they might not do yes. Japanese seldom say yes, but the trick is got to get them not to do no. So often the candidates who have the best relation with recruiters actually afford the recruiter a modicum of respect and give him his time and honest feedback. When dealing with one's own feeling of being happy or satisfied or not, and their abilities and their value in the market or not, they're also looking within themselves. Those people tend to be very confident, open-minded people who have true confidence in themselves, and deep confidence in oneself is not a common trait among the people who are salarymen. Yes? Now, I'm saying this empirically, with all due respect. We could theorize as to why this is, but I would say strong self confidence is an area that almost everyone could benefit from if they have the wisdom to understand it. And many salarymen, who are what we're talking about, who are going from the passive world of being a salaryman into being what you might call in sports a free agent. It's a big move. It's a change of, are you proactive and self-managing, or are you reactive? And the salaryman is, by its definition, a reactive modality. So those who are more proactive tend to have better relations with recruiters because they're more likely to be talking to them, because they're thinking about, how can I further my situation, because I could probably be doing more with my life. So the timid and those lacking confidence will probably be less likely to engage. If that makes sense.
Right, that certainly does. On the flip side, I think recruiters don't necessarily, well, on an industry average, let's say, the industry doesn't have the best reputation in terms of customer experience, let's say. What do you think are things that the average recruiter could do better to kind of raise the level of trust in a recruitment practice?
Transparency and ending the process with as much enthusiasm as you began it. If you're a surgeon and you cut a patient open, you don't suture him up properly, the patient will not have a good experience. So often recruiters are driven to start processes with great enthusiasm, but when they see that the process will not lead to immediate benefit for themselves, they just drop the conversation and the candidate is left hanging. This is probably one of the top complaints. Providing proper feedback and ending the process as it began, with that level of enthusiasm. Thank you very much for your efforts in applying to this company. I'm sure it was difficult, stressful, and thought-provoking experience. Thank you very much for doing this. It didn't work out this time, but let's go forward next time. And let me tell you why it didn't work out this time, because the candidates are often wondering, what just happened to me? Yes, I was being treated so well before the process began, and at the end I'm left, before sales, the salesman brings you champagne and gifts, and at the end of the process, after you've bought or the process is over, you get to dial 5 for technical support. Please hold, for a representative will be calling you shortly. So ending the process as diligently as you began it would be one good way.
Oh, that certainly resonates. I think there's recruiters that the second they hear the candidate say, I'm not interested in an immediate job change, the level of enthusiasm just drops off a cliff.
Well, and that's fair enough, but I'm saying, especially in the cases where a person applied for a job and then the process didn't go forward despite the candidate having positive interest, perhaps having taken a half day off and buying a new suit and getting a haircut and brushing all his teeth and et cetera, and having a long, detailed discussion with his wife as to why he might want to move forward. And then when the client no longer has interest in that candidate, the recruiter acts as if he never met the guy. You didn't finish it off as he began. You have to finish the process with as much delicacy and thoughtfulness as it was begun. We must think, what if this was my father? How would you have him? Treat people well, you might be treated well in return, right? These are people we're dealing with. They're not just numbers. These are not just KPIs. These are people with lives. And if they were rejected for a job, it might be the first time in his life he might be crushed. He wants to know why. Recruiters fail in wrapping up processes almost uniformly.
Right, that certainly makes sense. I want to get your thoughts on how you see the recruitment industry as a whole moving forward. So obviously, Corona was a big big thing this year. There have been a lot of new trends like working remotely, recruiting remotely, and things like this. You're someone who's recruited through all kinds of different economies. How do you see the industry 2021 and beyond? And I want to keep that open-ended intentionally.
Well, I've seen the end of the bubble, 2 Gulf Wars, the Southeast Asian currency crises, SARS, MERS, the IT bubble crash, Lehman Brothers, etc. This is not my first rodeo. Life goes on, but it never goes on exactly the same way. I believe that this 2020 experience in its entirety, with the working from home for various reasons, the technology to work from home and the desire to work from home has existed for a very long time. In fact, I think 20 some odd years ago, as I recall, California legislated that a certain percentage of the workforce must be teleworking or not working from the office, so as to cut down on congestion and being stuck on the 405 for 2 hours on your way home. That's in Los Angeles, by the way. So the technology has existed perhaps since the advent of ADSL and cheap internet, but the societal norms have not. Societal norms change over decades, as I mentioned earlier. So I think the working from home will be more and more common. This is communication-related technology has always been my specialty. It's where I began. Communication-related hardware. Fortunately for me, I focused in this obscure area, and then the internet came. That was good, right? You can't catch the big wave. You got to just be in a place where you think it'll come. Very fortunate that it came to me. And I rode that from the big swell, standing up all the way onto the surf. So I would say the technology has existed, but the Showa era concept that the office is the center of your life and all that went into that has been perhaps in place, and this has accelerated it. I don't think I'm the first one to observe that this 2020 experience has accelerated the digital transformations and the work from home thing by perhaps 5 or 10 years. In fact, I think I read this in the newspaper yesterday. It wasn't a newspaper. It was, I think, a Wall Street Journal article. I said newspaper because I'm old and I say stuff like that. I call my smartphone a cell phone, perhaps the way grandparents used to refer to a refrigerator as an icebox. Right? Well, you don't remember what iceboxes are. Neither do I, but that's what the old people used to call it, so I said I read it in the paper. Well, having said this, there'll be more and more work from home. Having seen this and believing that it could be done starting in roughly the year 2000, 1999, I believe, I established my first offshore call center in Wellington, New Zealand, which was an entirely enriching experience. Wellington's a lovely town. You can't beat Wellington on a good day. Never had a bad meal in New Zealand. And the award which you mentioned we got was not from the Japanese government. It was from the government in New Zealand. In fact, we were having a company opening party and setting up the stereo. Yes, I used to like to have a big stereo in the office. I was younger then. And I'll admit to being slightly intoxicated. It was nearly Christmas time. And the mayor of Wellington rocked up and presented us with an award for the first outbound call center to Japan. And at one point, we had more than 100 people there back in the good old days. And this was the first, I believe, offshore call center dedicated to supporting Japan in this way. There were a couple of offshore recruiting companies, but they were on the more or less the one line, like a fishing with one line. We were trying to turn this into a commercial fishing operation. And we had developed strategies for accumulating thousands of names. Back in the day where having names was precious. Again, back to the ammunition and the Industrial Revolution story, we had a primitive belt-fed gun, and everybody else was on muskets. And that was one of the reasons the original ATJ, my the company that I formed. And when my children were learning to walk and suckling at their mother's breast, I was off making deals to breathe life into this company. As I said, I was almost psychotically dedicated to success, as I had two little children to feed, and was essentially a functional illiterate in a foreign country. All I had was hard work and desire to help. And that's rocked on. Although perhaps I don't work as hard as I did then. But that point aside, I would say that the idea that recruiting could be done remotely, that work could be done remotely, was something I observed and began experimenting with in 1999. That rocks on till today, where as I'm sitting in Bangkok, we have a team of people here who provide back office support and various support to our Japan operation. So remote recruiting, or recruiting from remotely, is something we began in 2012. And so in this regard, as the shocks of having to work from home and people are getting used to it, because there's a learning curve to almost everything, we already had at that point 7-8 years experience in doing so. And I believe that's one of the reasons that even in these difficult times, we're able to achieve a modicum of success even now.
Right. I think this is a good point to start to wrap things up. If anyone who's listening is a recruiter, maybe perhaps wants to work for ATJ, or if it's a candidate or client interested to engage with you or some of the consultants that you employ, what are some things that you are looking for, and how can they reach out?
Yes, my email address, perhaps you'll put it on the link. It's easy.
Sure.
pal@atj.asia. PAL, like my name, Paul Adam Levine, @atj.asia. Send me a mail or find me online. If you're a recruiter and you can't find me online, you're probably not very effective. I would say we're looking to talk to any good people. I value interesting discussions with good people on almost any topic. Working in recruiting, candidates, clients, or just interesting people. We can learn so much from anyone, and no knowledge is a waste. And I value the opportunity to learn from you. And if you feel after watching this that interacting with myself might have bring you some benefit, then I welcome most anyone to reach out. If it should lead to commercial success, all the better. If it should lead to more self-awareness or growth or an interesting, thought-provoking discussion, that in itself is intrinsically valuable. So I am available to talk to one and all, old friends and new.
Okay, great. We'll certainly have your contact details in the description of the video. Okay, so I was able to maybe ask 20% of the questions that I wanted to ask initially, but it's certainly been a fascinating conversation. We might have to do a part 2 on one of these.
I would look forward to that. I'm happy to be of service to anyone. I came to Japan more or less penniless, and now I get to live my life as some sort of more elegant way, working hard for more than 30 years in recruitment. I feel a great sense of responsibility and appreciation for my time and all the goodwill that's been shown to me. I'm happy to return this in any way. And I thank you, Junsuke-san, for this. I'm proud of you for what you've been able to develop and how you've developed yourself from when I first met you till now.
That was how many years ago was that? That's a long time.
Well, I think you were a freshman in high school.
No, junior high. So I was 12 when I first.
You were 12.
Let's say when I first witnessed. Well, it was interesting. I think that's a story for another time. But
well, we have shared a long way to go, and I'm getting old, and my powers will start to fade, or perhaps they already have. Which is why I've tried to, I've dedicated myself. In 1998, I decided I'll no longer be a recruiter, but president of a recruiting company. These are slightly different things. And after the sale of ATJ, I decided my next mission in life is not to just create people, taking good young people and turning them into businessmen, but taking competent people and turning them into presidents and giving them that opportunity and helping create that. So that's my mission. If you feel you want to be president or master of your own fate, my own personal mission is to help people do that. And I am ready to serve.
Great. Well, Paul, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
A great pleasure and an honor, and the best of luck to you, Jun-san.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening. I think there were a few people who were tuning in throughout the show. If you found this conversation interesting, please share the video. I'll have the replay up in a few days. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.